Good morning, buenos dias, Medellin. Encantado estar acá. As mentioned, my name is Aaron Brecky, and I'm presenting New Aesthetic Domains in Architecture from Deep Dreams to Mid-Journey and the Aesthetic of the Artificial. I'm a professor at Stanford University. We're starting an architecture program, and some of the work that I'm going to show are things that I've completed, but I'm also going to just talk about some of the thought process now with the transition from analog to digital media and from digital media beyond to intelligent media. I would really like to thank Universidad de Antioquia, Ricardo Cedeño Montaña, and the whole editorial committee, the editorial and academic committee for organizing this event. I also want to acknowledge some of my collaborators in thought. Jared Grogan is the guy on the right, and he and I have been maintaining a conversation and experimenting a little bit with some of these new tools. And also, I would like to take a moment to mention Ricardo Rivera Verio. He is someone that I have great respect and admiration for, and he was taken away from us all too soon. He died of cancer 2 years ago, but his bright mind and lucid understanding of new media and the evolution of cinema was really something that was provocative for me. And he and I collaborated on other papers beforehand, and I just think he would have loved to be in Medellin for the symposium. I know he would have been there, and so I just want to acknowledge him before I start. Okay, so the order of my paper, I'm going to talk about why architecture in this particular symposium that's about media history, and then contextualize this within the current milieu, starting from postmodernist thought and feed that into how architecture fits into that, and also how architecture has transitioned from analog media to digital media and what that's meant for thought within the discipline of architecture. And I'll conclude with a remark from Heidegger. This particular symposium I found to be a quite interesting invitation. First of all, the fact that in the call, this was called a trading zone. And in that, I think it implies a certain dynamic of exchange of ideas. So that was very intriguing to me. And I'd also like to say, though, architecture, then, how does that fit in? Architecture is a form of design that can be creative, speculative, and critical. Architecture can be used to provide significant contributions to material culture, but also thoughts and frameworks. With the format of this, I'm really disappointed that I'm not in Medellin, because I think that some of the debate and discussion would be much richer if they're in person. Even as much as we pride ourselves in enjoying technology and being able to connect ourselves from 1,000 miles apart, it's really that cross-fertilization through discussions and debate that I feel are really useful in a symposium like this. So I apologize for not being there, but I thank you for letting me present, and I'm looking forward to seeing the other content that I can see online. Before I continue, I also want to posit that my product, this presentation, is not ready to be traded and exchanged in this trading zone, but I feel like this is the type of forum where they're valuing betas, prototypes, and I consider this presentation part of my R&D. I definitely welcome your thoughts and comments at the end of the presentation. And so, architecture. How does this fit? Well, one thing that it's important to note for most of you who I imagine are non-architects is that though we make things, physical things, like the image on the left, that's an image of a project that I realized in Bogota, there's a lot that we don't actually make, or that we're making through drawings. There's always a translation from drawing to building. The book on the right, the image on the right, is from Kester Rattenberry. He edited a series of essays that really questioned that role of architecture. And this is something that's carried through since the Renaissance, where the idea of architecture and being an architect is intellectual, it's design, and the way that is made visible is through drawings, not through actually building. But to be an architect, to get into that role, we have to think about the way we conceive of things. And I think it is important, again, to really set the groundwork and provide definitions for the tenets of architecture. I will say that building and a building is different than architecture with a capital A. And what is architecture then? It can be it can be anything and everything. And that might sound arrogant from an architectural standpoint, but architecture can be a political statement, a social statement, a functional space, a place of beauty, a place of solace, it could be an instrument for estrangement and defamiliarization. It could be a space for prospect or a place of refuge. And at its core, though, architecture is optimistic. It's an optimistic apparatus that seeks to impact human experience. Aristotle held that there were three basic activities of humans. Basically, that it's theory, poiesis, and praxis. In architecture, theory is that act of thinking, discussing, and writing about architecture. It's what we teach in schools, and it really is what sets the framework for that practice. Poiesis is that activity in which a person brings something into being that did not exist before. Poetry is from this root. There's also a meaning here that means to make, and so it's coming, there's something that's manifested. And praxis is that process by which a theory, lesson, or skill is enacted and embodied or realized. Praxis may also refer to the act of engaging, applying, exercising, realizing, or practicing ideas. And many philosophers have used this terminology in their writings, from Plato and Aristotle to Heidegger, Arendt, Freire, and others. And what do those other thinkers think of this? I think, as we look at people like Marx, of course, talked a lot about labor, but he also noted that praxis wasn't simply working. It wasn't just the action of doing. Praxis is a conscious, productive activity, and it's a free activity. It's a creative activity. And so Hannah Arendt, for example, had talked about the vida contemplativa and the vida activa, and in her writings she talks about that in our way of the contemplative life, we've neglected that active life, which is very crucial to how we engage with the world. And a thinker like Freire, like in the book Pedagogy of the Oppressed, he talks about praxis as reflection and action directed at structures to be transformed. And so that has quite a bit of agency in praxis. And the reason why I'm focusing so much on praxis here is that I do think we think about architecture as a thing that's sort of between theory and poiesis, but praxis is important, but also important not to confuse praxis with normal practice and creating buildings. So in the work of architecture, we use technology quite a bit. And I think in this particular symposium, technology is one of the key points of discussion. What is the role of technology in architecture? And it's, I'm going to go through the next couple slides and try to paint a picture of this indirectly and address this indirectly. But I'd like to read some thoughts from Heidegger to frame how he would extend that conversation of theory, poiesis, and praxis. Heidegger starts his essay talking about technology as instrumentality and a way of getting things done. But he also then leads into cause. And for him, to look at cause means to bring him to that discussion of poiesis, that there's a bringing forth of something, a revealing of something. And this is a key concept, is that this technology helps us reveal, aletheia. Heidegger, when he talks about technology, he says that he goes back to the Greek and says, this is also in the realm of truth. What does he mean by this? It seems that like technology and poetry are at odd ends with each other, but he does go through and bring up another concept that's called techne. And he says that technology comes from the Greek word technikon, which is related to techne, and techne is a part of poiesis. And techne is a new term that I'm introducing here too. This is something that Heidegger writes about as being something more than technology, but it's actually that knowledge that's gained. And it's similar to epistemology, for example, but it's something that we form technique to Heidegger is like a kind of knowing. We might think of it as expertise. it's more than practical skills, but it's know-how, and it's I'd say it's, I'm going to read a quote from Heidegger. It says that what is decisive in techne does not lie at all in the making and manipulating nor in the using of means, but rather in the revealing mentioned before. And so again, let's hold that kind of in our minds. What is that revealing? In my own work, here are some examples of things that I've been working on. The top is a geodesic dome that's located outside of Santa Rosa de Cabal. And in this case, for me, there was a kind of juxtaposition of ancestral thought, cosmology, and working with Embera peoples and my collaborators with Minka Lab, and also high technology using 3D modeling software to help find that form and derive the mathematics to actually create this structure that was made in really analog technology or analog tools. And in the images below, you see a couple of other projects that are also part of my work. And you see on the left is a book that was published as part of a conference that I developed with a couple collaborators, and it's called Architecture, The Digital Reveal, Architecture in the Post-Digital Era. And on the right, you see a little pavilion project that we created with some students of ours in La Calera, just outside of Bogota. And this is just made out of cardboard. But what I would show here is that the sequence of using ancestral knowledge at the top, there's certain ideas about that space that's formed in the dome. At the bottom right, this pavilion was developed by using form finding and optimization techniques, using structures, looking at physics to help develop the form. And this is actually a computational process that probably is very akin to what Gaudi did in Barcelona when he was using the catenary curves to develop his structures. Okay, so what's all this got to do with where we are now? And let's talk a little bit about postmodernity. And so we've definitely gotten into a post whatever, but it's valuable to go back to some of the comments that Frederick Jameson made when he started to talk about what he was seeing, because he saw a fundamental shift from modernity. He knew something was going on and he was trying to put his finger on it. The quote that I have on the screen says that it is in the realm of architecture that modifications in aesthetic production are most dramatically visible. This was a quote from what he wrote in 1984 that was originally published as an article in the New Left Review and then later developed into a full-length book. And I'm going to read what the publisher stated about that book. For Jameson, postmodernism is a forced but highly permeating field. Given that cultures are formed through mass media, this so-called mass culture indirectly forces us to shape our ideologies and brings us under the influence of media culture, a process that Jameson calls hegemony. Hegemony, however, has nothing to do with the post-colonial idea of colonization. Rather, it is a form of hegemony in the postmodern world where media and capitalism play the most significant role in colonizing people's thoughts and ways of life. He argues that postmodernism is the age of the end of traditional ideologies. The ending of traditional ideologies can be seen through a new wave of the aesthetic productions. And he uses architecture and painting as examples. For example, he compares Van Gogh's peasant shoes with Andy Warhol's diamond dust shoes. And he looks at that strange eclectic development that we see in that second half of the 21st century, of the 20th century. And as we move into the 21st century, I feel it's equally valid. In architecture, a lot of this thought kind of takes a strange deviation, and it's considered an ism. Charles Jenks is one who's written quite a bit about it, and he marked that stoppage of the modernist ideal, of the traditional ideals, was in 1972 when Pruitt Ego was demolished. This was a form of basically an understanding that we had failed for social housing in the US, and that these ideas that might have been seen reflected in some of the writings of Siam were denied, and that somehow we had to change the way we went about it. Jenks has written quite a bit, but postmodern architecture is something he wrote, but he also created this map. And what I'd like to say is that, as I continue to the next phase of this presentation, there are some concepts that are brought up here, some trends that he has identified as where kind of in the field of architecture, certain areas of interest. And I've circled a couple here, like postmodernism, deconstructivism. There's also, I'm trying to read here, the biomorphic, which might be related to yesterday's keynote lecture. And also, we get to the bottom where it's talking more about technology and this unconscious use of technology, where we're just kind of exploring. Now, in the first use of technology in architecture, there's the introduction of CAD software. CAD software is normally understood as computer-aided drafting, but sometimes computer-aided design. Many of you are familiar with AutoCAD, for example, and AutoCAD really just helps us become more efficient with the tools that have always been used. It's like drafting just with a mouse. And in this, though, there's not much intelligence. There are parametric systems set up, but it's really not through, there's not a level of intelligence that is perhaps as useful as it could be. Now, in parallel with the introduction of CAD, we also see that movement of deconstructivism, which is an extension of postmodernism. And what's interesting is that projects like Coop Himmelblau's project on the left became built. That was a project that was built in Austria. And this is going through analog media, but then into the digital. And the project on the right is Frank Gehry's Disney Concert Hall. And Frank Gehry was pivotal in this. He worked with many of the artists of the 60s, but then was able to bring his forms to life through advanced computation. For example, in the Bilbao Art Museum, he used CATIA. And this is a software that's used in aerospace engineering. His office then created a whole section of their office. It's called Gehry Technologies, and they converted CATIA into an architectural software. Now, as we moved from that analog to the digital, there was also some transition of thinking in architecture. Folding in architecture kind of followed through the work of deconstructivism. And architects are really kind of, I'd say, infamous for their sloppy use of philosophy. So, of course, deconstructivism comes from Derrida and some of this thought and the use of language. Folding in architecture was very much inspired by Deleuze and Guattari. And in that transition, there's a different mode of thinking about how we produce an architecture. But then that was really quickly followed up by the digital turn, because we started to see that digital was more than just CAD and a computer-assisted drawing. It became something more. And so people like Patrick Schumacher, partner at Zaha Hadid Architects, started to also see that there were aesthetic tendencies with when Maya was introduced into design studios, or when we had Grasshopper as part of the Rhino suite. And we could have something that he called parametricism. And parametricism, he tried to create kind of this camp in the production of space. But this was also, it's something that still continues to exist, but also met quite a bit of challengers and critics along the way. And as things with parametricism were seemingly fizzling out, there are interesting things that emerged on the internet. Things like Deep Dreams. Deep Dream is a computer vision program that was created by Alexander Mordvintsev and quickly bought by Google. And this is used as a convolutional neural network to find and enhance patterns in images via algorithms. And it creates a dream-like appearance reminiscent of a psychedelic experience in the deliberately overprocessed images. Google popularized that term deep dreaming to refer to the generation of images that produce these desired activations in a trained deep network, and the term now refers to a collection of related approaches. That's a definition that Google provides. And in this image, you can see it's pretty funky, right? I imagine some of you are familiar with this, but when we look at what we see in these images, it's this training that goes on when images are introduced, but it's scouring these images looking for things. So it's looking for eyeballs where they don't exist. But very interesting that it's described as deliberate. Now, as promised in the title of my talk, it's important to mention Midjourney. And Midjourney is something that's just taken the world by storm over the past year. It's quite controversial in the world of art, where art shows are now are adamantly against this tool. But it's really quite interesting because we've gone from doing AI in architecture as a pretty calculated set of coding using Python to now a language-based interface where we can describe what we want and get what we want. And so Midjourney, this is the screen. If you want to join, you get on Discord channel and you can start to create. And here's an image from something that they produced without modeling a single thing. There's no actual use of any kind of 3D modeling software. It's all by description. And in architecture, it's quite profound because there are many people that are now looking at these tools, and in a way they're drawing from architects of the past. There's still a training process where the model learns from existing architecture. So you see on the left a Zaha inspired project, and this is something that's just, again, flooding the internet in terms of production. So the question is, like, what is the role of technology now? What is the role of intelligence? What is the intelligence here? Because the designer now is conceiving of some notions about design, and it's being aided by the computer, but perhaps a little bit more than aided. And there's a certain authorship that now has been ceded to the computer. Interesting.
Time is up. I don't. Could you go to the conclusions, perhaps? Excuse me.
Yeah. All right. I'll make the conclusion.
Time is up.
Yes. Thank you. Last slide here shows that Midjourney, and DALL-E is another similar platform, are being condoned and used by parametric architecture. So people that were talking about parametric now is something. It's something of the past, and now looking forwards towards using these tools. And so with the concluding remarks, what I want to discuss, and what I think would be interesting to discuss in this forum, is how technology is therefore no mere means. Technology is a way of revealing. And if we give heed to this, then another whole realm for the essence of technology will open itself up to us. It is the realm of revealing of truth. And these are the new truths that we are seeing. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate this opportunity to present to you.